I'm Dr. Sandra Brown. I'm an ophthalmologist in North Carolina, and I have no financial conflicts of interest. I'd like to talk to you today about how drug products are regulated. On-label, off-label, or no label. How radical is your doctor? First of all, we need some basic information. What is a drug? What's a drug label? What's an approved use and unapproved use? How does a manufacturer get a drug label for their drug? Is it like getting a tag for your dog? What is the difference between not approved and unapproved use? First, what is a drug? These are two similar, although slightly different definitions. The key is that drugs are articles that are intended for the use in the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in humans or animals. We're not talking about food, water, or oxygen. You have to understand how the FDA is thinking about this. Regular people and ordinary doctors think like this. Someone made drug X to treat disease Y. The FDA thinks like this. Someone made X to treat disease Y, therefore X is a drug. You might think that this is just semantics, but in fact, it took me a really long time to figure this out, and it turns out to be extremely important. It's the manufacturer's intent that matters. So if you're Betty Crocker manufacturing chocolate icing to spread on a cake, the chocolate frosting is a food. If you change the label just a tiny bit and market it as an eczema lotion, this chocolate frosting is a drug. Same ingredients, one key difference. It's being marketed for the treatment of a disease. If you're marketing a drug, you have to have a drug product label. And there is a whole lot of information that needs to go on that label. It's so tough to get those drug labels right that you can actually hire pro advice. And if you just do a quick internet search of FDA drug label, you'll come up with a significant number of companies that will help pharmaceutical manufacturers to meet the many rules for labeling so as to achieve Food and Drug Administration compliance. Is a drug label what they stick in the box? Sometimes it is, but not always. They can also create what's known as a patient package insert. This also has to be Food and Drug Administration approved separately from the main product label. Considering the product label for Azicite, which I downloaded in full, this is an antibiotic eye drop for bacterial conjunctivitis, which is pink eye from bacteria, an extremely garden variety condition. The patient package insert is 5 pages long. But don't complain, because the doctor version is 10 pages long. There are rules about the print height as well. This is what my brother-in-law calls the "don't read me" font size. One of the key things that you find on a properly constructed product label is what the drug is made of. There are no mysteries here. Considering Azicite again, you can see that it clearly states what the active ingredient is, what it looks like, what the inactive ingredients are, the preservative, and even the pH. An approved product drug label is an all-powerful document without which the marketing and sale of a drug are not legal. So if you missed a comma, you got to cancel your launch ads. What is on-label or approved drug use? This is when there is no deviation from the approved food and drug label. So you've got a label, the label's approved. On that label, there's going to be a disease or several diseases. As long as you have one of those diseases exactly, and you're using the medication with the same dose, route of administration, drug formulation, and you are the same as the patients that the drug was tested on in clinical trials, then you are using this drug on label, and your doctor prescribed it on label. What is off-label or unapproved drug use? There is any deviation whatsoever from the approved Food and Drug Administration label. And the most frequent deviation is that you're not using it for the same disease. What does the Food and Drug Administration have to say about that? They pretty much say, it's not on us. The Food and Drug Administration has not assessed the safety or effectiveness of such use. But they do suggest that doctors shouldn't run too wild. They say off-label use should be based on firm scientific rationale and on sound medical evidence. Let's run through some off-label examples. There's off-ish label, Restasis for mild dry eye. Restasis is actually approved only for moderate to severe keratoconjunctivitis sicca, which is a long name for dry eye. And the categories of moderate to severe are defined by the clinical trials study documents. I was a little bit too busy reading the Public Health and Welfare Act. I did not review these documents. But Restasis is prescribed constantly for mild dry eye. Because you're using it as an eye drop, and because you have dry eye, the adverse events are reasonably expected to be similar. Off-label would be azocyte for blepharitis. At least in this case, we're using the drop on the same body part. It's approved for treatment of bacterial conjunctivitis, and not just any bacterial conjunctivitis, but conjunctivitis due to the bacteria which are specifically listed under indications and usage. The presumption when using azocyte to treat blepharitis is that killing bacteria on the eyelid margins, first of all, occurs, and secondly, improves meibomian gland function. So those are two presumptions, neither one of which may be true ever, or one or the other may not be true in your case. However, you are still using an eye drop as an eye drop, so the adverse events are reasonably expected to be similar. It is more likely that you will have little to no benefit than that you will have an incredibly rare and previously unheard of adverse event. How about off-label? This is when you use a drug on an entirely different body part. And the classic example is using Avastin for macular degeneration. Avastin is actually approved to treat metastatic colon cancer, where it is given IV. But it's used to treat wet macular degeneration. It's injected directly into the eye. Okay, this is weird. Here's what happened. Lucentis was the first approved drug for wet macular degeneration. Avastin and Lucentis work in exactly the same way. They block the abnormal development of blood vessels. Conveniently enough, they're both manufactured by Genentech. So using Lucentis is an on-label use. But some smart retina surgeon out there said, hey, you know what? Avastin might work just as well. So the first retina surgeon to use Avastin was maybe running slightly wild, but he turned out to be right, so he got away with it. And in fact, his boldness has benefited millions of patients across the country who can afford Avastin, whereas they could not easily afford Lucentis. So you want a drug label? How to get a drug label of your very own. First of all, it takes hard work and decades of drug development. This requires lots of money. You also have to get lucky. And there are many drugs in development that never even make it out of the laboratory because they just don't work. Then you have to prove to the Food and Drug Administration through human clinical trials that there is substantial clinical evidence that your drug benefits the disease that you propose it treats. You have to also prove that you can manufacture it consistently and that the benefits outweigh the risks. Let's take a moment to review the difference between an approved and an unapproved indication. The Food and Drug Administration drug status in both cases is approved. If the disease or condition is what is actually on the drug product label, that is an approved indication. The synonym is on label. It's legal to market the drug, legal to sell it, and legal to prescribe it. If your drug status is approved, but the disease or condition that it's being prescribed for is unapproved, meaning it's not on the drug product label, the synonym for this is off-label. It's not legal to market it, but it is legal to sell it and legal to prescribe it. Because I can prescribe it, a pharmacy can dispense it. But let's add another column, the difference between an unapproved indication and a not approved drug. If the FDA drug status is not approved, what that means is that it has not been assessed in the treatment of any disease or condition. The synonym for this is illegal if it's being marketed or sold. Prescribing is not really the issue here. You might pretend to prescribe this medication by filling out a so-called script form online, or otherwise notifying the manufacturer that they should call the patient while she's driving home to get her credit card information. But there is no true prescribing. So this is the heart of the talk. An indication for use, a disease or condition, may be unapproved. A drug that the FDA has not evaluated at all is not approved. I think a lot of confusion comes because that second line there, you often hear people say that's an unapproved drug. But in your own head, whenever you hear that, just kind of try to substitute the words not approved drug so that you can keep in mind the distinction between we know nothing about it and something much more frequent, which is an unapproved use of an established medication. I can hear you saying, Dr. B, illegal is so harsh. Well, I didn't say it first. This is the Food and Drug Administration. Please know that if you're being charged for these products, and they're referring to regenerative medicine products, or offered these products outside of a clinical trial, you are likely being deceived and offered the product illegally. Regenerative medicine's comeback is, it's not a drug, because drugs are nasty synthetic chemicals. They're pharmaceuticals. They're not biologics. Our drug is natural, biologic, preservative-free. Actually, it's not a drug. Or maybe it's an over-the-counter drug or a cosmetic if we say so. And that's why the Food and Drug Administration just doesn't worry about us doing our thing. I mean, if we were really breaking the law, they would have stopped us, right? But once more with feeling. If your website states that your product improves dry eye disease, you are manufacturing a drug. It's the intent that matters. After all, you're not selling it as salad dressing. A good follow-up video on how one BED manufacturer avoids treatment claims but fools you into not noticing is Diagnosing Scam Pharma. And for those of you watching my videos and wondering, what is with the snail? You'll meet the snail in the pending video discussing exactly how the Food and Drug Administration regulates biological products. Regenerative medicine tries to claim medical legitimacy through what I call crowd consensus approval. I was on the phone with an amniotic fluid processor last week, and I had this phrase quoted at me. Doctors can use our products as long as they conform to generally accepted standards of medical practice. I think what this person meant was that we're shipping it all over the country. It's being used for all sorts of cosmetic things. If enough doctors do it, it must be okay, because it's generally accepted. But that's not really what generally accepted standards mean. It means the standards are based on credible scientific evidence, no. Published in peer-reviewed medical literature, no. Fake references. Recognized by the relevant medical community. Relevant's a bit of a challenging word. Recognized the product might be, but acknowledged as effective by the majority, I don't think so. And my professional society has not said anything one way or the other about biologic eye drops, but I'm going to start a letter writing campaign on that issue. So remember, off-label use is supposed to be based on firm scientific rationale, which BED manufacturers make up, and sound medical evidence, which for them means testimonials. And some of these manufacturers are not trying very hard to pretend. We talked about the requirements for drug labeling. I got a PDF of the provider information. Remember, Azacite was 10 pages long. This was one side of one 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So let's get back to the primary question of this talk. How radical is your doctor? What are your doctor's prescribing patterns? An arch conservative will prescribe on-label, but will not prescribe off-label. This is also known as someone who is broke and out of a job. An ordinary physician will prescribe on-label and off-label. They won't be prescribing no-label or not approved drugs because they're not tempted. There may be no relevant products in their field. An ordinary but confused eye care provider will prescribe on-label and off-label and may be recommending no-label, not approved drugs because they don't know the difference and their colleagues prescribe them. A radical doctor will prescribe on and off-label, but will also prescribe no-label, not approved biological eye drops. They know the difference and they don't care. If your doctor is recommending an eye drop derived from somebody else's body parts, which is not FDA approved and they know it, this is my definition of radical. I hope this information has been of value to you in understanding the difference between on-label and off-label use, and the difference between an unapproved indication, and a not approved drug.